Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation podcast network.
My experience learning about biosimilars was just like, this is a great option that I think will work for you from a medical professional that I really trusted. And learning that it was more of an issue in regards to what would be covered under my insurance and less of a concern in regards to how well it would help me.
Welcome to Breaking Down Biosimilars, a podcast that brings light to biosimilars and helps you better understand the role they play in your healthcare now and in the future. I'm Zoe Rossblatt.
And I'm Conner Mertens. Both of us are patient advocates and community outreach managers at the Global Healthy Living Foundation. Our goal is to introduce you to biosimilars, what they are, how they get approved, their potential savings, and what promises they hold.
We also hear from a few people who've been taking biosimilars about their own experiences, and we cover some common myths about biosimilars and try to separate fact from fiction. This time, we're going to talk with a few patients who've had to consider switching to a biosimilar and find out what their experiences have been like.
And we'll hear why some people were initially wary of making such a switch and what they had to do to overcome their skepticism.
One of the people I spoke with was Sabina Neto from Southern California. She was diagnosed about 3 years ago with psoriatic arthritis and currently takes Inflectra, the biosimilar for Remicade.
I didn't latch on to the concept of biosimilar. I was on a different biologic and it wasn't working any longer. And so in the conversation with my rheumatologist, she had two suggestions. And one was another biologic that was an injection. And I was previously on one that was an injection. And then she suggested also Inflectra, and it was an IV infusion because she could adjust the medication if it wasn't working more readily than she could with the injectable. So I actually didn't get a ton of information on what Inflectra was from my rheumatologist. I just had the two names, and then she sent me a bunch of information. So in reading that, and obviously Googling, the term biosimilar came up. And also when I was searching for Inflectra, Remicade kept coming up. And so I wasn't sure. I was like, is this Remicade? Is it Inflectra? Is it like a different name? I just wasn't sure. And so the more I read about it, I was like, okay, this is like a generic of Remicade. And so I read more on my own about both of those drugs, as you do when you're on a new medication. And I just kind of put it in the back of my head because I was obviously very used to the concept of generic medication and it didn't bother me. So it didn't really raise any red flags for me.
So obviously a good deal of confusion on Sabina's part when her doctor first told her about the biosimilars.
It seems like Sabina wasn't really getting a clear idea at first about what biosimilars were. What kinds of information did your doctor share with you, and what were those conversations like?
Now that I realize that there is hesitancy when people are on biosimilars, I would have thought that there would have been a little more of a, hey, I'm suggesting this medication, it's a biosimilar, this is what a biosimilar is. But there was none of that. It was just, here's the name of the medication, and they send you like a link to an information packet about the medication. I totally glazed over the concept of biosimilar. I just thought it was more related to the category of biologic than what it is. And so I just kind of went into it not fully understanding what the difference in the term was. And then again, when I Googled it and saw the references to Remicade, that's when I was like, oh, that's what that means.
So Sabina had to do a lot of digging on her own to learn what biosimilars are and how they're different from their biologics.
Right. And it's a two-way street. Patients have to be their own advocates, but providers need to know about all the options for treatments, including biosimilars, and communicate those options to their patients. That's what I heard from Criswell Lavery, a clinical researcher at the University of Pennsylvania.
On the provider side, making sure that all of the rheumatologists, oncologists, hematologists, whatever, are aware of the prescribing option. I think a lot of that tends to be on the hospital side, just depending on the medications are available and suppliers that they're using and how widespread information is about the available options for patients and for prescribers to prescribe them. I think the other side too is patient knowledge. Look it up. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And so I would say, doctors will know the best patient advocacy groups and different medical groups. They'll know where to find accurate information about biologics and the biosimilars. And so ask for more information. There's nothing wrong with being more informed. As long as, you and your doctor are having a conversation, you can say, I saw this, can you tell me more about it?
So Zoe, tell me, is the confusion because biosimilars have only been around for a few years in the United States?
Not entirely. Dr. Simon Helfgott is a Boston area rheumatologist, and he told me that prescribers sometimes don't spell out the distinction between a biologic and a biosimilar, and that's because there's fundamentally no difference between the two. But he said that needs to change.
What I try to tell patients is when we are selecting a biological drug, it's usually a talk about the concepts of the drug we're going to use, why it might be the drug of choice for that particular patient, what its benefits are, and what the side effects may be. I'm not going to distinguish whether they're going to get the brand name or the biosimilar because really it's been shown that these are virtually identical. So it's not as though I would say to them, if you happen to get the biosimilar drug for this product, it's going to be a lot different and these things will happen. But if you get the brand name, these things will happen. It really is the same conversation. So when you discuss this with patients, though, I think what we do need to change is up until now, most prescribers would just say, you're going to get this drug and we'd name the brand product. But there will be some confusion because I've had patients call me and say, I thought you were giving me Inflectra and you gave me another name, or you're giving me some other form of infliximab that I've never heard of. So I think it's going to be incumbent on prescribers to explain that to patients that even though we're using one particular name, there are several options in that category. And for the most part, they should be viewed pretty much similar in terms of efficacy and tolerability.
I also spoke with Lauren McClinton from Toronto. She was diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis when she was just 3 years old, and she switched to a biosimilar after her other medication stopped working. She says although she did her research on her own, her rheumatologist also gave her a lot of good information.
In my research online at first, I had sort of been wary of biosimilars because they kind of felt like a generic or a not so great option. But after having a conversation with my rheumatologist, she explained that the biosimilar that I would be taking is very, very similar to the original one, and the difference really lies more so in the branding and the naming of it as opposed to the actual efficacy of the medication. My experience learning about biosimilars was just like, this is a great option that I think will work for you from a medical professional that I really trusted, and learning that it was more of an issue in regards to what would be covered under my insurance and less of a concern in regards to how well it would help me.
And then there was Shelley Fritz, who was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia. She actually found out a few years ago that she could only get a biosimilar for her treatment in her area. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that was like and being faced with this option?
At first, it was very disappointing because I had changed treatments 6 times. So I felt like a failure. But it needed to be done because the medicine that I was on, though it had worked fairly well for a few years and kept me working and doing the things that I needed to do, it wasn't working as well as it had in the past. And I was still having a lot of issues with a lot of joint pain and fatigue and everything and stiffness that just wasn't going away during the day. So my doctor and I talked about it, and he said, what about changing to something else, like maybe a medicine that's a TNF alpha blocker that I had tried before? Not that same medicine, but I had tried something else in that classification. And I said, well, I don't think that's going to work because I've already tried that drug classification. Like I had this notion that I've already been there and done that. So now that I've moved on to other medicines and other classifications, I shouldn't go backwards. But he explained to me that medicines do different things, and that although Remicade was a medicine that he was suggesting for me, that wasn't available in my area, and the biosimilar for it, Inflectra, was available for me. So then I went down the rabbit hole of research and I started looking up studies about Inflectra versus Remicade and what was the level of efficacy between people who were just on Remicade or ones who had switched to the biosimilar. And I was very pleased. I was a non-believer. So it's just kind of getting familiar with what the biosimilar can do and go in there and look at the studies and see, did it make a big difference between being on the biosimilar or being on the compared medication?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the bottom line here is don't be afraid to do a lot of your own research when you're thinking about switching to a biosimilar.
Yep, that's right. And Criswell Lavery, who I spoke with earlier, says your doctor can be your ally.
You are their patient. They want to make sure that you are happy, that you are healthy, and that you are getting the care that you need. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for more information about something that you're unsure about. And I think that doctor-patient relationship and the communication is so important with things like this.
Next time on Breaking Down Biosimilars, we'll hear more firsthand stories from people who've actually made the switch to a biosimilar.
All my inflammatory markers are down. The stiffness in the morning, overall pain is significantly decreased. I feel significantly better, but the condition is still very much a daily part of my life and how I manage my energy and how I have to manage pain. It's just a lot easier to manage.
We hope this episode helps you have more informed conversations with your doctor when discussing your treatment plan. We'd love to hear your feedback, so send your email to breakingdownbiosimilars@ghlf.org.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Down Biosimilars, a podcast that brings to light biosimilars and helps you better understand the role they play in your healthcare, now and in the future. If you like this episode, give us a rating and write a review for Apple Podcasts. It'll help more people like you find us. I'm Connor Mertens.
And I'm Zoe Rothblatt. See you next time.
Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation Podcast Network.